Have you ever been to like one of the original like Pearl Jam house shows at like the off ramp or Rock House?
No, I have actually, the only time I've ever seen Pearl Jam live was in 2018 when they did the home shows here in Seattle. I have to be honest, it's like Pearl Jam really wasn't my thing when I was, I moved here in 1990, and so definitely was here when all those bands were playing. I was a little too young to see the big grunge bands playing in the smaller clubs because all of those were 21 and older, and I wasn't 21 until 93. but uh um but I was a huge, moving to Seattle. I was initially was a huge Alice in Chains and Soundgarden and Mudhoney fan, and kind of got into the other bands a little later. But again, I mean, I feel like, with Pearl Jam, it was like, you know, I had been, working at the museum since the mid 90s. I mean, I was a part of collecting a lot of the material that we had, related to Pearl Jam, for years. And, I've gotten to know those guys and the organization over the last, 15 years or so. Um, and they're kind of stellar human beings. And you got to hand it to a band that has been around for 30 years. And I mean, just gosh, to be in a band for 30 years, I mean, and I say that as somebody that has been in the same band for 24 years, that it's very, it can be really hard. And the fact that they were able to keep it together when basically none of those other bands except for Mudhoney were able to keep it together at all. I mean, they all of the rest of them imploded, I think, is a huge feat. And the fact that they're still loving what they're doing, putting out great records, and seeing them live playing for 3 hours at a time. So I don't know. It was fascinating to work on that exhibit, because it was that exhibit, really is 30 years of material that they created or had saved. And you know, in some ways it's the polar opposite of the Nirvana exhibit that I did, where the Nirvana exhibit, there was like 20 lenders, and it was very carefully crafted. Every object, is in a very specific place and kind of drove that narrative forward, through this, basically 6-year arc of a band, being around 6, 7 years. Whereas, Pearl Jam, it was just like, holy shit, there are so many amazing things in here that it's hard for those holy grail objects to really stand out in a way. I mean, that's often the hard part with an exhibition, is that, you're just like, oh, okay, well, we've got these three awesome things, that people are totally going to gravitate to. And then you fill in all the rest of the blanks with, more support materials and etc. I mean, we've got a lot more than that in the Nirvana exhibit. But with the Pearl Jam exhibit, I mean, it was just like every single thing was amazing. It's just like, Eddie's first guitar, Mike McCready's guitar he played in Shadow, or the 4-track Ed used to record his first demo, the leather jacket and flannel shirt that he wore on the Hunger Strike video. I mean, just like goes on and on and on and on. Not to mention the dozens and dozens of pages of handwritten lyrics, or like those notebooks that Eddie writes his ideas in. I mean, they just delivered like 2 giant Tupperware bins full of hundreds of those, and what we have on display is like a third of those. And so I don't know. I mean, the amount of access that we had was super cool and amazing, and the amount of trust that we had, and a lot of that kind of stemmed off of that. A couple years prior, I did a show with Pearl Jam at the airport that was focused on Pearl Jam's posters that they had kind of done with hundreds of artists over the last several decades. And so that kind of built a level of trust that we could kind of put into this exhibition. But and I know I'm going way off of your topic, but the reason that show came about was that they were doing those home shows in 2018, in August of 2018, and in April of 2018 they approached us and said like, hey, we should partner on something. And that quickly got into discussions about, well, maybe we do an exhibition. But I mean, it's already 2018, and we've already budgeted, we've already, everything is already figured out space wise. And so we ended up, we didn't have any budget. We ended up, um, I think, closing down an exhibition a little bit early to allow for space for that show. And we were able to kind of scramble together like 30 grand or something like that, which is in exhibit terms is nothing. And so we're just like, how do we do this so that, we got to be super scrappy. The band is on tour in Europe, so we don't really even know what we're going to get. I mean, I took everything from, from their offices and their warehouse that I could, and we were able to get material that way. But there was still like, tons of stuff that we had no idea if we would be able to get or not, because we couldn't, access that stuff until the guys got back from tour. And so, literally we were, like 3 days before opening, we were putting in like 100 more artifacts. So because of that, all the nebulousness around this, we had to come up with a structure that was going to be super loose, that, would allow for basically anything that we were going to get in kind of a loose, organized fashion. And it was really fascinating to work on. I mean, one of the early inspirations for that was that we went down to their warehouse, which is in South Seattle, and it's literally this like giant industrial warehouse, and it has like industrial racking from floor to ceiling with all of their equipment and stage stuff and etc. And one of our guys on my team, this guy Keith, who was our production manager, he was just like, well, what if we just like use this industrial racking, and so that kind of got us this idea of like, well, what if we just make like a fantasy version of their warehouse in a way. And the industrial racking super cheap to do. We just put some Plex on there. We didn't have any time to make mounts for things. We had to come up with systems like magnet systems for all the posters on the back walls, where it's like you screw in a screw and they actually have a magnet that kind of attaches the poster to the wall. It's like not the most artifact safe way of dealing with things, but we did this with going in eyes open with the Pearl Jam camp, where we were taking care of it better than they were, so they were psyched about it, and we just kind of made it happen. But it was like 4 months from conception to done, and has what, 700 artifacts in there. It's for a Pearl Jam fan, it's absolutely, you can't see more Pearl Jam stuff anywhere in the world. And when we opened up that exhibit in August, we had the biggest attendance we've ever had. We actually kept the museum open, I think, until like 2 in the morning, and we had 9,000 people that day at the museum, which a busy day at the museum is like 3,000 to 4,000. So it was a huge opening, and that was partially because, like, for those Pearl Jam home shows, 50,000 people came from out of Seattle into Seattle for those shows for the weekend. So it was a huge influx of fans. But it was fascinating to like talk to some of those folks as they were looking through the exhibit, because we made this interactive where you could look through all of the different Pearl Jam shows and sort of find the ones that you had been to, and you could look at the set list and like the backstage passes and and stuff like that. And fans were going like, well, it's like, I'm not that much of a fan. I've only seen 37 shows. It was just like this level of fandom that was really fascinating to watch. And but yeah, I don't know. It was a really fun exhibition to do, and I'm glad that we still have it up on display.
Going back to like what you said about like holy grail items and exhibits, what do you think was like one of the biggest like holy grails for the Pearl Jam Home and Away?
Wow. Well, I mean, just the fact that they saved everything is so fantastic. I mean, that the Mama Son tape, they still have the tape that Ed sent the band, and which got him the gig as singer, which I think is amazing. We have the 4-track that he recorded that on. Like I said, the Hunger Strike outfit I think is amazing. The acoustic guitar that Jeff Ament wrote the melody for Jeremy on is in there. I think that's fantastic. Gosh, going through the galleries, I mean, I love all of those Jeff Ament's broken basses, like his NBA basses, I think are fantastic. Gosh, what else? I'm trying to mentally go through the gallery. Just like the fan related stuff, I think is really fascinating. Like those pinatas that they, gave to the band when they played in Mexico City, I think are amazing. Gosh, what else? Like the Ed's typewriter with his typed lyrics. I mean, his composition notebooks, I think, are super fascinating. I mean, especially because, I mean, there's a lot of trust there because, I mean, like I said, I mean, they just handed us a couple bins of these these composition notebooks, and it's like you can read through there and there's a lot of personal stuff in there. And so it's like, as a curator, it's like really trying to, it's like, you have really private things in your hand that you need to be really respectful of, and sort of keep your eyes on the prize of, like, it's like, what's going to work for the audience. And gosh, I mean, I feel like there's countless examples of that. I mean, if we were in a different exhibit and I was just able to get like 1 or 2 pages of handwritten lyrics or something like that, I would think that was amazing. But the fact that we, I mean, we literally had like 700 pages of handwritten lyrics to choose from, but we got to choose the whole case full. Being able to work with the Ames Bros and other artists on getting original poster artwork and showing that process of creating posters from original sketch and idea to the color separations onward. So I don't know, I mean, I think there's so many amazing things in that show.
uh Looking at like the culture of Seattle at the time, like Pearl Jam was a thing, like that grunge, like DIY house show, like culture. Do you think there's still like a place in Seattle for that like culture as like we move more towards like tech industries?
Well, I mean, I think Seattle is very different, obviously, than it was then. I mean, I think that, when you're talking about late 80s, early 90s in Seattle, I mean, Seattle is still pretty much a smallish town, medium-sized town. So, rents were cheaper. It was easier to be an artist. And, I think that, people always ask, like, why did it happen in the Northwest? And I think, part of that is the affordability. Part of that is the weather, where you're spending, 9 months of the year inside. And, if you're a creative person, there's a lot of time to focus and create. I think there was definitely a sense back then that it's like, if you wanted to make it in music, you left Seattle, you went to LA, or you went to New York, or bigger places where there was an established music industry. And there wasn't really. But definitely with what happened in the early 90s, I mean, that kind of changed things forever, in some ways in a good way, because I think that Seattle was very, at best, ambivalent towards its local music scene, and at worst, like, really, really antagonistic towards people playing music in Seattle. But because of what happened in the early 90s, I think that sentiment it's done a 180, where it's like Seattle views itself as a music city now. You've got Seattle City programs that are dedicated to music. I mean, the airport is all over that. We've got it, we have a museum like ours. There's a vibrant, club scene where you can see pretty much any kind of music any day of the week in Seattle. So I think, in some ways it's really great, but in some ways it's really not great, because I mean, Seattle's really good at destroying all of its history. And so, finding any of those venues that, that were around back then is really hard at this point. You know, a lot of the visible markers of Seattle music history are gone. Um, and then, yeah, I do think that, you know, just with things being so incredibly expensive here, it's it's really hard to you know survive here, much less play music. So I have a lot of friends that, you know, over the last 10, 15 years have moved to Tacoma or Olympia or, you know, different places, just because of the affordability aspect of it. So I think there has been this kind of creativity drain, and which makes me worried. But at the same time, it's like people still find a way to make it work and make music. And you know, part of that is that, you know, as long as we have like sources, you know, regenerating sources of youth, like, you know, the UW or different colleges or things like that in town, you're going to have, you know, people that are going to keep playing music. And so yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm, you know, it's I think that, you know, the landscape is very different than it was then in some really really big ways, but it's also you know, still I think a positive place for music. So I'm of two minds.
Okay. What do you want people to like walk away with after like exploring the Pearl Jam Home and Away?
I think for that exhibit, it really was, you know, trying to illustrate, you know, one, you know, the longevity of this band and the idea that, you know, this is a group of individuals that has been together for 3 decades and has somehow been able to make this relationship work in a really creative way across, you know, more than 10 albums, and you know, just being able to like travel around the world and sort of impact audiences, you know, in a really impactful way. You know, I mean, it's in some ways it's like they have almost this kind of Grateful Dead vibe to them, where, you know, as far as like how their fans, you know, interact with them, and you know, in that fan aspect, because it is such a big part of, you know, who they are. I mean, really trying to illustrate that it's like, you know, they have passionate fans all around the world, and you know, that idea that it's like, you know, if you're a band, you're nothing without those fans. And the, you know, the fan aspect is so integral to Pearl Jam, as well as that idea of like Pearl Jam really supporting other artists. You know, it's like when you go in that gallery and you see all the various posters on the wall, and like, you know, all of the bands that they're kind of supporting and, you know, bringing along with them, or the different artists that they inspire to make those posters, or, you know, etc. That it's, you know, they're very much, you know, bands don't exist in a vacuum. You know, they exist in this kind of orbit, you know, around, you know, what's happening, you know, with their peers, with the scene that they came from, with the bands that they came up with, you know, with the fans that they inspire, and really trying to like, I don't know, visually illustrate that. I mean, there's not a lot of hand holding in that exhibition. There's not a lot of narrative because of, you know, the necessity of, you know, how we put it together. So it's, you know, really trying to give people more of an impressionistic feeling about what it means to be in a band for 30 years, and to, you know, be in this relationship with, you know, your community and your fans.
What made you interested in the history of science fiction? I'm a long-time science fiction guy, really, since I was a kid. My mother plunged me down in front of Star Trek when I was little, and the bug just kind of bit me. And pretty soon I was reading books, and reading comics, and watching shows. And so I can never explain why I love it. I just do. I like thinking about the future. I like thinking about possibility and exploration and aliens and all that stuff.
As a curator for a museum, what is the best feeling in the world for you?
The best feeling in the world for me is, initially I would say, oh, we put in an exhibition, we get it done. And I walk around, I'm like, oh yeah, this is like what I envisioned. That's great. Getting it done is great. And it is great. But sadly, I often forget. The really good feeling is later, when I come in and there's visitors here and there's people running around and they're taking it in and they're getting it. So for example, I had a previous science fiction exhibition called Icons of Science Fiction, and it was going to close. We needed to space. So on a weekend, I went down. I was just hanging on a bench, and these two guys came downstairs. And one of them was like literally dragging the other one's arm. And he was like, "Dude, I just went through this. I know all this stuff now. I've got to show it to you." And that's what it's about. It's not just about like one person learning. It's about two people or more connecting through the exhibition and wanting to share with each other what they're learning or what they're seeing, and then hopefully they're going to go off and watch some movies together or read some books or whatever. That's totally where it's at.
When receiving props and like set pieces and costumes, what did you learn about like how they were made and like what like detail went into them?
Oh yeah. When you look at film and TV props, costumes, things like that up close, it's surprising sometimes because honestly, some of them, especially the older ones, they're simpler than you would think, and honestly, they're for lack of a better term, kind of janky. I mean, sometimes this thing that you see on a show and in your imagination, it's this like very technical, cool scanning device or something, and then you look at it, it's like made of painted wood and the lettering's kind of sloppy and things like that. And it's charming, and it's a reminder that, especially for older things, they didn't need to make stuff super detailed because, people are going to be watching it on a TV screen this big, and that detail doesn't need to show. And it's also a reminder that honestly, a lot of these older shows and films were low budget, and they were doing the best they could. So that's always a bit of a revelation. More stuff is made of wood than I ever met. There are more wooden ray guns than any other kind of ray gun, I think. Then there's the exceptions. Then there's the times when you see clearly some prop folks have put an intense amount of care and detail into something that might barely be seen. For example, I saw once some paper money from the new Battlestar Galactica, which was filmed in the early 2000s. And, in the show, people just got passing around real quick. You're really going to see it. If you look at the prop, it's finely detailed with this incredible artwork, and they worked in glitter and little holograms and security threads and all this stuff. I mean, they just went completely overboard with this money. And clearly, they just loved it. They wanted to do a really, really good job.
When people come to visit the exhibit, what ideas and feelings do you want them to leave with?
So when I was planning this exhibition, I was thinking about how really there's like two primary audiences. There's folks who know and love science fiction like me, and then there's folks who don't. They're just kind of, they have a certain understanding. And I wanted to be able to speak to both of those audiences. So I wanted to be able to show the real aficionados, the fans, things that would sort of surprise and delight them, show them behind the scenes and insights into what they already know, but not make it all like insider baseball for people who don't know So that means in creating the exhibition, I wanted to kind of speak on a couple different levels. One of my big goals is for people to come away with a deeper appreciation of science fiction as not just a popular genre, but a genre that explores the human condition and explores how we live our lives. I think that's a big part of science fiction. We tend to focus on the trappings, aliens, spaceships, ray guns, what have you, floating skateboards. But of course, what those are all doing is they're in support of stories that are helping us think about who we are and how we live our lives, or how we choose to govern, or how we treat each other, or how we treat people who are different from each other. I mean, that's this whole wonderful, frothy, fermented, story world going on. And a big goal for this exhibition is to get people thinking about that other level, that other layer, thinking about how science fiction tells these sometimes really deep, really interesting stories. Not that it's always deep, right? Sometimes science fiction is just fun, and that's great too.
What made you interested in horror movies?
I have to say I've never been a huge horror film fan, to be honest. I think this is one of the fascinating things about being a curator at a place, like ours, a museum of pop culture, is that we often get the opportunity to explore subjects that we weren't necessarily experts in, and I think that's kind of pretty typical for our institution, but pretty atypical for other museums. Usually curators have a focus of study that they, really, really delve into, and they kind of stay pretty closely to those areas that they've done their schooling in. But, when we decided to do a horror exhibition, it actually, to be honest, it came up because the founder of our museum, Paul Allen, when he was still alive, he brought up the idea one day of he was like, you guys should really do a horror exhibit. And for us at the time, I mean, I don't know if you know a lot about the history of the museum, but we started out when I started in the mid-90s, we were going to be a Jimi Hendrix museum. And that idea kind of expanded out pretty quickly into a museum about American-ish popular music. We opened in 2000 as the Experience Music Project. In 2004, we added a whole, half of the museum became a science fiction museum. So we had music and science fiction. And then we started exploring outward from there, around 2010 or so. And really horror was the first sort of exploration outside of those two centers of science fiction and music. And to be honest, it's like institutionally at first it was like, ooh, how is this going to work? It's like, how do we, is our audience going to like this? How is this different than one of hundreds of haunted houses that you could see? So it was, there was some concern from staff about how this would work. The idea that it isn't necessarily all ages or family friendly, depending on your family, I suppose. But I think, being able to explore that so deeply, and when we were able to launch that in 2011, we saw, there was definitely a huge audience that was very excited about the exhibition, and and just because you don't, there's not really a lot of experiences like that. I mean, like I said, there are infinite number of haunted houses, but there's not a lot of exhibition experiences where you kind of delve into these deeper topics around horror cinema, and I think for me it was like I kind of took to it as it's like I seen lots of horror films, but it wasn't necessarily like kind of my kind of nerdy attractive center, but it was really fascinating for me to kind of like look at it from a curatorial lens, and being able to we ended up working originally in 2011 with Roger Corman, Eli Roth, and John Landis, and then for the 2017 version also included Roxanne Benjamin and Karen Kusama. But really being able to like not only examine their films from a curatorial lens, but also just looking at the whole a century of horror cinema, and trying to kind of pull out those films that really were touchstones across the decades. So I think for me, it gave me a huge appreciation for what horror can do, what it does say about the human condition, and why it's an enduring sort of genre, and in film. So yeah, I mean, it was a very fun exhibition to work on, and I learned a ton from it, and I'm glad that people have received it really well.
As a museum curator, what is the best feeling for you?
I think one of the best feelings is being able to walk into the exhibition space and see how people are reacting to the content and the narratives that you have brought to play. And it's really gratifying when it feels like people are sort of understanding what you were what my perspective, or what kind of my goals were for the exhibition. But it's also really fascinating to see how people interact with the content in very different ways, because I'm often surprised by how people interact with things. I think that's always the challenge of exhibitions, is that an exhibition is not a novel, it's not a documentary. It's a very very kind of distilled experience within a finite space, and so you really have to pick and choose a very small amount of narratives that you want to explore. And the challenge of an exhibition often is trying to give the sense of nuance or comprehensiveness when you literally do not have the space to do that. And and the way that you kind of achieve those things is that you're really trying to engage as many senses as possible for the visitors. I mean, visitors ingest information in very different ways. Some people love reading the text, some people will never read the text. It's I tend to have, when you approach an exhibition, you have sort of hierarchies of importance, and you always want to I guess my goal for people going through an exhibition is that you want people to like never be in a space in an exhibition where they're scratching their head and wondering, why is this here? And through that idea that all of the content is structured in a hierarchical system that overlaps itself across different sort of media across the gallery. It ultimately, if it works well, it should be something where it's like people walk through an exhibition and they never feel lost. They always feel like, oh, okay, this makes sense that this is here. But a lot of that is engaging the visitors through everything you can. It's through that exhibition text, it's through the graphic design, it's through the interactives, it's through the sound design that's around you, it's through the set, the set design that you have. I mean, if we could do more smells and tastes in there, it's like I'd love to do that stuff, but then we get into some collection issues. But yeah, I mean, it's I don't know, every exhibition to me, I feel like is a learning experience. And, what we learned in, 2011, when we first did this exhibition, we kind of took some of those clues and sort of added those, made some changes for this 2017 version. And, primarily for the version that's up right now, it's a lot more scenic than it was. And, I feel like the first version, which I liked a lot, but it was very kind of academic, where it was, you went into the space and through artifacts and text in the films and et cetera, you did learn a lot about horror. It wasn't necessarily very scary or tense in there. And so I think that was one of our big challenges for 2017, is like, how do we amp up the tension and the scariness in the space when we don't have the budget or the staff to have people in the gallery scaring the shit out of you, or we can't pulse people through in a linear fashion like you could say in a Disney experience or something, and time sort of tense experiences within that linear experience. What we could focus on primarily to generate that sense of dread or tension or scariness was the sound design and the set design and the lighting. And so we really tried to double down on areas that felt very scenic, like with the zombie bunker, or the vampire chapel, or the serial killer slasher kind of wall there. And then really focused on, there's a 16 channel score in the gallery that has different elements that appear in different parts of the gallery and kind of morphs as you go through. So I don't know, it's been an interesting experience to go through and to see people digging it. So yeah, but I'm pretty proud of it, and I feel like it has worked pretty well.
All right. You said you're not much of a horror fan, but I still want to ask you this: what is your favorite horror series, like franchise?
Franchise. Does it have to be film, or can it be?
It can be anything, books,
Anything?
book
Okay.
comics.
Well, I am, it's funny because it's like, while I, don't necessarily watch every horror film that's out there, I do read a lot of comics. And for me, Mike Mignola's Hellboy universe is one of my favorite sort of, horror adjacent media, sort of places to dig into. I think I have pretty much everything he's ever put out in that. And I just love his sort of gothic sensibility and his minimalist artwork. And that definitely is super high on my list. Other things, like especially in comics land, thinking on the manga side, like Junji Ito, and his series Uzumaki, which was made into I think a couple films as well. Spiral is what it translates to. I think is phenomenal. Gosh, what else? Yeah, I'd have to go look at all of my bookshelves and things like that. But yeah, I think that answers your question for the most part. It's, for me, it's like there are like individual horror films that I just find amazing. It's just going back to classics like The Shining, or it's like I love like the original Wicker Man because it's so fucking weird and in the best way. And I love that the idea that the hero just gets burned in a giant wicker man at the end of the film. I don't know. I definitely like a lot of the more kind of more avant-garde horror films that keep popping up, like Midsummer or things like that. I've really enjoyed those films. But yeah.
Yeah. What have you like learned about like horror movies and like horror media from like curating this exhibit? Like what what has been your takeaway from doing this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just loop back to, what I said at the beginning. I mean, just that idea that, it's like, uh, I think a lot of people view horror as only escapism or only frivolity, or, you know, or if you don't like horror, it's just like stuff that you could never find any interest in. But, really trying to explore in a deeper way how those things connect to who we are as human, and that those experiences can be really valuable, I think was, a big thing that I was excited about, and I wanted to kind of highlight in the exhibition, that it's, there's a reason why, the horror genre is so popular, and it's, and it's deeper than just entertainment.
What do you want people to walk away with after they see Scared to Death? Like, what ideas and feelings?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, with that exhibition, which, has gone through two different iterations, it started out as, we launched that in 2011 as, the kind of first iteration of it, and then we kind of refreshed it in 2017 and added more content to that. But I think the exhibition goals kind of remain the same, of, trying to explore the world of horror film, not only as a genre of entertainment, but as something that, is really kind of cozied up to who we are as humans, on a biological level, even on a sociological level, certainly. But that idea that, horror film, it's like, we say that right at the beginning of the exhibit. It's like, if horror film scares us, why do we like it? Why do we like watching it? And and it's trying to throw out this idea that there are these kind of competing elements to it, that, that horror can be really progressive in some ways. Like, it can be sort of a way to sort of safely experience taboo subjects. It can be something that, really delves into the human condition, but it also can be very regressive as well, because it can sort of reinforce sort of, hierarchical systems and stereotypes, and can lead to some bad things as well. So just like trying to examine horror from a lens that is not only about fun, but is also about trying to sort of explore the human condition.